Right, so before I begin, before I forget, in case anybody is interested to have a copy of the handouts, just write your email down after the talk or during the talk before you leave, you know, and I'll be happy to send you a copy of the slides. You know. My students know that I always give out my PowerPoints. All right, so please feel free to let me know, okay? And I will send it to you eventually. Right. So as you can see, the title is a bit different, right? The subtitle has changed, obviously. So the general inquiry is still the same, right? Where I'm interested in the question: can we say that natural law is universal, right? So as you know, I work on comparative philosophy, and I like to study Confucianism. So I decided to limit today's lecture just to a comparison between the natural law theory of St. Thomas Aquinas, and then we're going to look at some texts from Mencius, and we'll see if we can get a conversation going between the two of them. Right? So the lecture is very straightforward. It's just in two parts. The first part, I'm just going to explain something about natural law theory according to Thomistic understanding. Right? A lot of it, in fact, all of it is from the Summa. And then we'll look at some texts from Mencius, because Mencius is very valuable for this aspect. Mencius has a very rich reflection on what we now call philosophical anthropology and virtue theory. Right? So that will be the scheme for tonight. Right? So by way of introduction, we can mention this, no? That very providentially, no? When we were deciding the schedule for the lecture series, I was totally unplanned, rather Franciscan, very unplanned. When Father Franz asked me when I want to have my lecture, I told him not in the first semester. So that's why we're here. It was fixed to be February the 4th, and totally unplanned. Right? It happens that it falls on the annual observance of Interfaith Harmony Week. Right? It's been going on for 10 years. Right? So the first week of February is always the week for interfaith harmony. Right? And it happens, surprisingly, right? Totally unplanned on my part, honestly. Totally unplanned on my part, that the Pope and the Imam were involved in this World Day for Human Fraternity. Right? It's exactly today, 4th of February. Yeah. I don't believe in conspiracies. I don't believe in coincidences either. Right? So I would like to dedicate tonight's lecture as an effort to intercultural dialogue, you know, if such a thing exists. Right. So let's see if it exists. Okay. So let's begin by looking at what we mean by natural law theory. Right. So I hope that my students who were with me in the afternoon will not fall asleep. Don't worry, I will not repeat what I said in the afternoon. Don't worry. I won't. I promise. So I even give a different definition from the afternoon one. So natural law, in its very in a simple formulation, right? The natural law just means a rule of action. Okay, and it directs every created thing. And so for every action of a created thing is governed by some principle. Yeah? And so sometimes you will see, the plural, natural laws, sometimes. Right? And when that happens, it normally refers to principles that regulate natural objects. In this case, it could be organic things or inorganic things, right? So, for example, the typhoon, an inorganic thing. A typhoon is an object. It's a natural activity that obeys certain laws, right? Typhoon appears. Typhoon season begins in June. It ends the latest by October, right? And so you will not see a typhoon coming in February or March or April, right? Unless the end of the world is coming. Right? So a typhoon is a fixed season. I mean, my point is that a typhoon is a fixed season. Right? It's a warm weather phenomenon. Right? And so natural objects obey a certain rule. That's the point. So classically, we might say that there is natural law, and then there are laws of nature, to refer to this broad sense, laws of nature. Now sometimes you will see the plural, natural laws. Right? So for tonight's lecture, let us just understand it this way. So natural law refers to a rule of conduct. Right? It tells us what to do and what not to do. So it prescribes regulations to us. Right? And it is received by human beings according to our rational nature. And then it helps us to measure our actions. And so every part is important. Right? Natural law gives us precepts. Right? We will see that in a bit. And then it has to be received by a rational being, second part. And the third part is that it has to be executed by the human being to measure our actions. So we will see this thing. Right? So tonight's lecture, so my job tonight is to lay out these three components. And then the challenge for us is to see, can we find them in another tradition, namely classical Confucian tradition. Right? So we can't go wrong by going back to the Summa. Right? So St. Thomas tells us, natural law is nothing other than participation of eternal law in rational creatures. See? I didn't repeat myself, right? You see? All totally new material to reward those who come to the lecture. That you may learn something new. Right, so, prima secunde, question 91, article 2. So that's the domestic style, no? Always precise, very brief, precise. Unfortunately, it's so precise that we don't know what it means. What in the world is eternal law, right? Natural law is participation of eternal law in rational creatures. But what is eternal law? So we have to unpack. Right? So that's the work that we have to do. Right, so the eternal law in the Summa, okay, as I understand it, okay, refers to the implementation of God's plan for all creatures. So God governs the universe by this law. So he makes all beings behave in a particular way. So it governs the whole universe. Right? So So now we say, living things and non-living things. That's the way I learned science when I was in high school. Living things and non-living things. Or in philosophy, we say animate or inanimate, living, animate or inanimate beings. Right. So that's eternal law. The principle, the general principle that governs the whole cosmos. Then natural law is that part where human beings share in this eternal law that is much broader. So natural law applies only to human beings. And so the background to this idea of natural law is that all created things receive their nature from the Creator. And not only that, we are given a purpose in life. And so our purpose is to seek our perfection. Right? So for human beings, so in the Summa, the human beings are meant to find their way to God, and all the other creatures serve human beings. Right? So the distinctive way that human beings partake of eternal law would be the rational mode. So we manifest natural law when we order our behavior to reach the end of our nature. So we know that the end is suitable for us because it fulfills or it completes our human nature. So the understanding is that natural law is in accord with human nature. It comes from our nature. Right? To follow natural law, really, in a Thomistic understanding, to follow natural law is simply to act according to the nature that God has given to us. So it's not something that is imposed from outside. It's following the principles that flow from our being. Actions follow from being, the Thomistic principle. Because we who live in the modern world tend to have this thinking that law is imposed from outside. Right? We are governed by an external rule. So we have to conform our behavior to this external rule. But that's not really the understanding from natural law theory. The principles we can discover by understanding our own nature. We operate based on intellect and will, and so we live according to that which would fulfill these capacities. Right? And so everybody obeys the eternal law. Right? So other living things, and like animals, oxes, rats, and oxen, they obey the eternal law, but they are not aware of it. Right? They follow their instinct. They're governed by their instinct. Typhoons obey the eternal law without knowing it, obviously. And they do it by necessity. So human beings are special. For better or for worse, human beings are special. They are the only ones who can disobey natural law, because we have freedom. Right? We have the possibility of using our intellect to find the truth, and then we can choose it. Or we can not choose it. Right? We can choose or not to choose. And so we have this power of obedience or not. However, we're supposed to obey the natural law, right? Because we said earlier, if we understand that natural law is given to us in accord with our nature, to go against natural law then is to go against our nature, right? So there's this idea in the Summa, like St. Thomas says, that moral action is rational action. Because of this, right? We can use our reason to discover the principles of natural law, and then we act so that we can act according to it to fulfill our nature. So if we go against it, then that simply means that we go against our nature. That's irrationality. So disobedience to the natural law is a violation of our nature, human nature, that is, or to disobey reason. So this is something that we can find in the Thomistic understanding of natural law. It's something distinctive in St. Thomas. Right? The Franciscan theologians think of law as emanating from God's will. Yeah. Like Occam, William Occam. Yeah. He thinks that the law is given from God, but is simply a decision of God's will. Like God chooses it to be that way. So, like if God chose, God could have made killing to be moral. He could have done it, but he didn't do it. But St. Thomas has this understanding that no, it comes from God's reason. And so human beings can understand it, and it goes according to principle. So that will be an important difference in Thomistic understanding of natural law theory. Right? Now let's take a closer look at this relationship between natural law and eternal law. I think it's important for us. And that will be this. For this one reading, okay, I may or may not. I don't consider myself a Thomist, by the way. I don't. I'm still trying to understand St. Thomas' work, but this is what I derive from the text. Okay? Now, it seems to me that St. Thomas is saying that the eternal law has two manifestations. Let's put it that way. It comes to us in two ways. Right? So one way is the divine law, and the other way is the natural law. Yeah? So for those who have seen the Summa, St. Thomas is a bit confusing. Yeah, I know. So that's why it's not really clear, and he's very concise, so you have to unpack it. He lists out, there are four. There's the eternal law, the divine law, the natural law, then the positive law. And how do they connect to each other? It's not, at least not clear to me. Okay? But then I'm not a Thomist, so I'm just a philosopher, right? So it seems to be like this, okay, that natural law and divine law manifests the eternal law. So the eternal law has a source in God. Right? And so we have revelation, like 10 commandments. Right? So that's divine law. And then natural law is derived from reason. So we could say that eternal law will be like one coin with two sides. So you could get overlapping material. You could know about the truth about how to live from revelation, or you could also know about how to live from reason. So this is Thomas's contribution to natural law theory in the history of theology. That Thomas was rather optimistic, maybe not cautiously optimistic, but Thomas was rather optimistic about human beings' ability to find out the truth. But there are always two ways. You could get to know the truth from revelation, or you could get to know the truth from your reasoning. So divine law is found in the Word of God, right? And we can receive it through faith, okay? And we accept it by the power of grace working in us. The natural law is perceived by reason. Now this is important, because if this were not true, think about this. No? If this were not true, natural law is perceived by reason. If this were not true, then we will not be able to find natural law in any other culture on earth. Right? If natural law were only, if Occam is right, that the law is given by God's will, is, let's say, arbitrary, then human beings have no other way to discover it except through revelation. Right? Well, St. Thomas has this point of view that we can know it through reason. We can also know it through faith. Right? So he's one of the early people who harmonize, the truths of faith and the truths of reason. He had this balance between theology and philosophy. So if it is true that natural law is perceived by human reason, then we could try to find some semblance of natural law theory in, let's say, Chinese culture or Indian culture, and so forth. Okay? So both laws come from the eternal law as a single source. So again, Thomas is very optimistic. The natural law and the divine law should not be in conflict, because they come from the same source. Right? God gave us revelation. God also gave us reason. So if they both come from God, then in theory, they shouldn't conflict. Yeah? In theory. If both are working well. Right. Okay. So another way to look at it will be like this. No? Let us develop this a bit further. Right? So we see that eternal law is the source. Right? And we can get to know the part that applies to us through reason. And human beings formulate positive laws, meaning specific legal codes, right? Like the criminal law, canon law, basic law of Macau, constitutions. They're all laws, right? Positive laws, formulations of laws by human beings. Right? And we should not expect that positive laws look the same all over the world. They will be impossible. Right? So, for example, in the traffic laws, right? In Macau, people drive on the right. Yes? You go to mainland China, people drive on the left. Right? It's strange, I know. So the application of the law to concrete situations depends on the situation and the legislator. Right? So the further we go from the eternal law, we see greater divergences. Right? But when we get, but the source is one. Right? So here's one way to look at it. Okay? So eternal law is so imagine that law is a tree. Not the best analogy, I think, but imagine that law is a tree. Right? So you have the root. Eternal law is the root. That's the foundation. Then the natural law is the body, the trunk. Then positive law are the branches. Right? So you can get many divergences. Okay, so the idea is that all systems of legal codes have principles, and they also have positive formulations. So it cannot be otherwise. Right? So the principles are discovered. The rules are formulated. They are created. So we don't create the principles. They are found in they are derived from the nature of the universe. They are derived from understanding of our nature. But this part is created in the sense that they are formulated according to the situation and according to the mind of the legislator. So earlier I said that St. Thomas is optimistic. I think it's also realistic, quite realistic. So he tells us that human reason cannot have a full participation of the dictate of divine reason. So God issues commands from his reason. But don't forget this. Thomistic principle. The thing is known in the knower according to the mode of knower. Okay, I'm not here to give you an epistemology class. The idea is that the way that we receive God's revelation depends on our human way of knowing. Okay? So we can receive God's teaching, but at best we know it imperfectly. But we know something, okay? And that's very important. Okay? And we know it in a human way. And we cannot do otherwise. It's just that we should not be too optimistic about human knowledge. Certainly we should not be too sure about human knowledge. Right? Very likely we know things imperfectly, and therefore there is always room for improvement. In fact, St. Thomas says that natural law can always increase. He means the contents. Because the more we learn about human nature, the more we learn about the world, we can understand more things about the content of natural law. Yeah. It's always possible. Right? So an example is like human beings have understood that slavery is wrong, right? Probably, hopefully, not very sure. Right? But this realization was quite recent, no? It's less than 100 years that we realized that slavery is wrong. Right? Even in Jesus' time, people didn't think that it was wrong. But they didn't seem to think that it was like terribly immoral. It was more important that you treated your slaves well. There didn't seem to be anything inherently immoral about having the state of slavery and a state of freedom. And people didn't see anything wrong with it. The important thing is that you didn't mistreat your slaves. It was okay to have slaves. I don't know. I don't approve of slavery, but my point is that the contents of natural law could very well increase over time when we learn more about human nature or about the world. Right? It's always possible. So we know the contents of natural law imperfectly. Right? And it's in the nature of human being to grow and to improve. Right? So the way that we participate in natural law is in terms of general principles. Right? So we cannot expect natural law to give us all the answers to all our moral questions, fortunately or unfortunately. Right? So one of the reasons is that the first principle of practical reasoning is true of all things that we can choose. And so this general principle is formulated in a very abstract way. And the precepts of natural law are understood to be valid for all people, all time, and all places. So it can only come in the form of a general formulation to make it comprehensive. Okay. So I don't have time to, we did this in today's class, precepts of natural law. I don't have time to do it now. Okay. I'm already halfway through, so I don't have time to do it now. Okay. Those you can talk to my students. They were in the class today, this afternoon, about the precepts of natural law. So I only have time to talk about the first precept, that is the first principle of, also known as the first principle of practical reasoning. Okay? So good is to be done and pursued, and evil is to be avoided. Right? So if natural law exists, right, the sign that we know natural law would be that we are able to formulate a first principle of moral reasoning. Right? Okay. And so the characteristic of this moral principle, or this first principle of moral reasoning, is that it is self-evident. Right? So I cannot explain to you, I cannot prove to you that good is to be done and evil to be avoided. Right? I can't. And I won't bother to try. Okay? If you understand the meaning of good and evil, and you understand the meaning of to do and to avoid, then you will know that you should seek good and you should avoid evil. Right? Because nobody seeks evil and avoids good. Yeah. That's the point. If you look at the principle, then you will see that, yeah, that must be true. Okay? I can give you examples of the first principle of practical reasoning, but I can't prove it to you because it's the most fundamental precept. Okay? It's possible, of course, that we make wrong decisions. Right? I've said this 10 times to my students today. It's always possible that we make bad decisions. We choose the wrong thing. Right? But we choose the wrong thing because we think that it is good for us. Right? So we're always seeking good. Right, so the first precept is formulated in a very abstract way, because it must cover the whole range of goods that human beings may pursue in this life. Okay? And so our awareness of natural law comes from the knowledge of our human nature. So that's the first thing that we have to notice, that natural law derived from human nature. Human nature is a gift from God. It's a Thomistic way of understanding. And then, if natural law exists, the recipients must be able to formulate some first principle of practical reasoning. Second thing. Right? A couple of other things more. Not only must human beings be able to formulate a first principle of moral reasoning, okay, they must have two more powers. So Thomas calls it synderesis. So synderesis is an intellectual habit by which we incline to know the good and to avoid the evil. Synderesis. So synderesis is to do with knowledge of first principles and the first precepts of natural law. Right? That you're able to grasp the first principles. Right? And the second thing is that human beings, if natural law exists, then human beings must be able to exercise conscience. So conscience simply means we take those general guidelines, then we apply them to some situation that we encounter. Okay. So to simplify it, synderesis is this intellectual habit whereby we're able to know the existence of the law, and then conscience is taking the law that we know and then applying it. Right? So that's the first part of natural law theory. Right? So then let us now look at the text of Mencius and see if we can find anything that is useful for our consideration. Right? So Mencius was a third generation disciple of Confucius. He might have been, he's from the 3rd century BC. He might have been the disciple of Confucius' grandson. Might have been. Yes, according to one account. But the point is to give you he's a philosopher from the classical Confucian school. Okay? In case anybody doesn't know Chinese philosophy. Okay? Right, so let's look at this passage, 7a1. Okay? So Mengzi says, Mengzi Mencius. Okay? This is simply Mencius is just the Latinized version of Mengzi. Okay? In case anybody doesn't know. Don't worry. I'm not trying to insult your intelligence. Just want to make sure that I don't expect that everybody knows Chinese philosophy. Right? Even though we're in China. One country, two systems, so we can't expect everybody to know. Okay, no. Right, okay. No, I guess some people have foundation here, so you haven't studied Chinese philosophy yet. Okay. So Mengzi said, to fully fathom one's heart is to understand one's nature. Very nice. Yeah. So heart here, heart in classical Confucianism means heart and mind. The place of affection and the place of intellection. Both. Not separate, both. So if you understand your own feeling and thinking, then you understand your own nature. Even better, to understand one's nature is to understand heaven. Oh my goodness. Ah, very nice. How do you get that? And not only that, there's a mission involved in being human. To preserve one's heart, he means to keep the goodness in your heart intact and to grow it. To preserve one's heart and to nourish one's nature is the way to heaven. Mamma mia. Right? Oh. Very spiritual, no? When you look at the Confucian text, at least I'm always struck by this. When you read the classical Confucian text, how spiritual and even religious they are. So 孟子曰 So 尽其心. So this heart, it was, for those who can read Chinese, so this is heart, mind, and this is nature. Right? So, could Mencius be talking about some cosmic design? He says about heaven. And heaven gives us a nature. So I suggest to you, it will not be an exaggeration to say that there's a plan of divine providence in the Chinese, the classical, be more careful. There might be a plan of divine providence in the classical Confucian worldview. Certainly, all creatures receive their nature and their end from Tian, heaven. Heaven is simply what is supernatural, what is above. Because Tian means, this one, Tian means sky. Tian means sky. It might be personal, it might be impersonal. But it simply means what is above human being. And heaven gives us nature. And we have to direct our nature to perfect our life. Let's go on to 6A6. So Mencius' disciple was very puzzled by something he heard. Right? So the disciple is Gong Du Zi. Okay. So Gao Zi is the rival of Mencius. Okay. So this background. So in his time, there were rival schools of philosophy. Mencius was the Confucian school, and Gao Zi was the rival school, like an opponent. Right? So Gao Zi says, human nature is neither good nor not good. Indifferent. A bit Franciscan. Ouch. Then some say human nature can become good and it can become not good as well. Mencius says no. So nature again, so Xing. Xing wu shan. Wu bu shan ye. Neither good. So this one means it can mean good and also beautiful. It has a moral meaning to it. It has a moral meaning to it. It includes a moral meaning to it. And Mencius clarifies to his disciple, as for what human beings are inherently, they can become good. There is goodness in their nature already. That's why they can become good people. This is what I mean by calling their natures good. So nice, huh? He makes excuse for us. As for they are becoming not good, this is not the fault of their potential. We already have what we need in us to become good. Humans all have the feeling of compassion. Humans all have the feeling of disdain. Humans all have the feeling of respect. Humans all have the feeling of approval and disapproval. So we skip this, no? Hence, it is said, seek and you will get it. Search and you will find. Abandon it and you will lose it. So Mencius is rather optimistic about human nature. Right? He seems to think that there is already an inherent goodness in human beings. And if they were to realize their potential, right? We have compassion in us, disdain, respect, approval, disapproval. We are already on the way to goodness. Okay? So this is compassion. 恻隐之心. 羞恶之心. This is disdain. Right? Or what is translated as disdain. Then 恭敬, respect or deference, and then 是非之心, the approval, disapproval. It really means like discrimination. Yeah, discrimination. Approval, disapproval. So I suggest to you, it seems that, according to Mencius, human reason already participates in the eternal law in some limited way. It doesn't go all the way, but it's going some way. Because Mencius gives to us certain principles for moral behavior. He's saying that in human nature, there's already compassion. There's already approval, disapproval. In human nature, there's already respect, and so forth. Right? And so, if we were to realize our nature, then we know that natural law proceeds. This is what I suggest to you. So now it's about the first principles of natural law. 6a7. So Mengzi said, things of the same kind are all similar. That's common sense. Like, why would one have any doubt about this when it comes to human beings? Right? Longzi said, Longzi is a scholar from Mencius' time. Okay? So Mencius is quoting a scholar. Longzi said, when one makes a sandal for a foot one has not seen, we know that one will not make a basket. Right? A basket is for vegetables and fruits and so forth, so you need like really big. Right? When you make a sandal, you make it according to the size of a foot. So the similarity of all the shoes in the world is due to the fact that the feet of the world are the same. They come in similar sizes. Yeah? And then after he goes on to, so mouths have the same preference. He means taste, of course, tongue. That mouths have the same preference. Oh, I don't want to hold you up for too long. Okay. And ears are the same. Okay. When it comes to sounds, the whole world looks to music master. Okay. So and he even says that, he even says that no one in the world does not appreciate the handsomeness of a man like Tzu. See? Like, I don't know, people say that George Clooney is the sexiest man alive or what. No? So, no one in the world does not appreciate the handsomeness of George Clooney. No response. Maybe you don't agree with me. So I don't know. But the point is that, so this point is, I think, controversial in our time. Because we are more skeptical of the idea that we could have common judgments, right? Yeah. But I would argue that in our 21st century, we understand more clearly that there is evidence that we do share some common faculties of judgment. No? Like, for example, like the example that I use sometimes, no? Like Beethoven. Beethoven is not German music, or Austrian music for that matter. Beethoven is not German music. Beethoven is world music, right? You know, if you play Symphony number 9 in Japan, people appreciate it. They may not know the fourth movement. They may not know the German lyrics, no? But they appreciate the music, and they are moved by it. Right? Beethoven is not German music. Well, Aristotle is Greek philosophy. Aristotle is not Greek philosophy. Aristotle is philosophy. Anybody who looks at the arguments can understand Aristotle, I think. Right? Even people who don't read Greek can understand Aristotle, I hope. Otherwise, we might be wasting 2 years of our time. No. So I believe that we can. Right? So then Mencius gives the punchline. What is it that hearts prefer in common, human hearts? I say that it is order and righteousness. So this is Li and this is Yi. So the sages first discovered what our hearts prefer in common. Order and righteousness delight our hearts, like meat delights our mouths. You know, like, for example, Korean barbecue. No, you don't like. Brazilian barbecue delights our mouths. No. Colombian barbecue. Okay. Meat delights our mouths. You don't need to be a Brazilian to enjoy Brazilian barbecue, right? No. You don't need to be a Korean to enjoy Korean barbecue. Right? Meat delights our mouths. So here, the point is here. Wait, Li, order. So this is order, and this is what he calls righteousness. What's the point? The point is that the sages were the ones who realized something that all human hearts love in common. So this suggests faculty of synderesis, where we might be disposed to know the law. And this law, this first principle, must be true and applicable for all human beings. And by that, we are inclined to doing good and avoiding evil. One last passage. I will not test your patience. 4 minutes more. Okay. Last passage. 286. This one, every Chinese knows this. Every Chinese knows this passage, or they know one version of this passage. I'm not joking. I heard this when I was in high school. My teacher gave me a version of this passage. Okay? Not the exact one, but a similar one. Okay? So, Mencius insists, all humans have hearts that are not unfeeling towards others. The kings had hearts that were not unfeeling towards others. Okay, so his point is that in the heart there is already a sprout of compassion. 恻隐之心. Then he gives the famous story. Everybody knows this. The reason why I say that all humans have hearts that are not unfeeling towards others is this. Suppose suddenly someone saw a child about to fall into a well. Anyone, without exception, anyone in such a situation would have a feeling of alarm and compassion. Not, the important thing is the qualifier. He qualifies it with this. Not because one sought to get into good graces with the child's parents. Not because one wanted fame among your neighbors. And not because one would dislike the cries of the child. Because this response, the feeling of alarm and compassion, is something spontaneous. You do not know who the child is. You do not know whose child it is. You just happen to see that this child was about to fall into the well, looking at the water, climbing over the well. Right? And your immediate reaction is that you would wish to help the child. Now, it doesn't mean that you will actually help the child. That's not his point. His point is that you would have this spontaneous reaction of alarm and then compassion. You would wish to help, okay? Whether or not you succeed. Okay? So this is how Mencius gives an argument by analogy. From this, we can see that if one is without the feeling of compassion, one is not human, 不人. If one is without the feeling of disdain, one is not human. If one is without the feeling of deference, one is not human. If one is without the feeling of approval and disapproval, one is not human. Okay. 由是观之，无恻隐之心，非人也 not human. 无羞恶之心，非人也 not human. Okay. So it is part of human nature to have this feeling of alarm and compassion when you see a child about to fall into a well. Okay. Doesn't it sound like conscience? I suggest to you. It seems that it's a human thing to look upon innocent life and to wish to protect it. So conscience is applying the law to particular cases. In this case, the encounter of the child at the well. So this hypothetical person, right, sees immediately there is a duty to hold back the child and save its life. I hope that you will agree with me. I'm not saying that everybody will rush to save the child. No, I'm not saying that. But you have this immediate response that you realize that you should do it. Right? It's a duty. Right? And this response takes place no matter whose child it is, because it's an innocent life. And the life is not able to protect itself. And very likely, because it's an innocent child, if you were to fail to save the child, I'm sure all of us would try to save the child. If you were faced with this case, if you're alone and you are the only one there, I'm sure that you would do it, right? Because I believe that you are human, right? So if one fails to rescue the child, then you will feel, I regret. I should have tried to help this little girl you know. It would have been easy to grab her hand and prevent her from drowning. Right? So, conscience gives the command. There are these general principles. Right? So for Mencius, the principle is compassion, approval and disapproval. So you have to apply it in some concrete situation. See, Mencius is very smart. Mencius doesn't say, imagine if it's your mother-in-law about to fall into the well. You would have the spontaneous reaction. No, he didn't say that. He's smart. Imagine it's a child about to fall into the well. So that we all agree, yes, yes, yes. Mother-in-law, maybe not. We don't know. The Chinese were very knowledgeable about marital problems and human psychology. They were. Yes. Right? So let's conclude now. That's all. I'm already at 1 hour. Okay? Let's conclude now. Right? So I've tried to demonstrate to you that in one text, the Mencius text, we can try to find a semblance of natural law theory. I don't know if I have succeeded, but it's a work in progress. I'm still working on it. I haven't had much time. I was doing the program review faithfully. Yes, so I didn't have much time to think about natural law theory and ontology. But my point is this: so we can conclude for today's session like this, that St. Thomas tells us that there must be an ontological basis for natural law. Right? That is, human nature is given by God, and God gives us the orientation. Now, I suggest that in classical Confucianism, there's something corresponding to that. There's heaven. Heaven gives us nature, and nature, our human nature, has an orientation to goodness. And so the eternal law, this principle working in all of created things, has a supernatural source. Right? So if you don't think that there is a religious worldview in classical Confucianism, then you can consider this intercultural dialogue. Right? But I tend to think that there is a religious dimension in classical Confucianism, so I think that it is inter-religious dialogue. Okay, it's up to you. But certainly, I would say that the eternal law has a supernatural source, right? And natural law is participation of the eternal law in human beings through reason. And so the evidence that human beings have a natural law is that they are able to formulate first principles. And so we saw that in Mencius. Mencius seems to believe that inherent in human nature there is already compassion, disdain, respect, approval and disapproval. For him, this could be first principles of practical reasoning. And so positive law then would be determination based on these fundamental principles. Right? And positive law always varies among different societies. But it's important to see this. In both Catholicism and Confucianism, positive law is a necessary part of culture. Culture is that which is created by human beings to improve civilization. Right? So there's this respect for it, positive law. Right? Now, I would argue that positive law in Confucian tradition and also in Catholic tradition is development of natural law in both cases. Okay? Of course, they have different formulation of first principles, but I believe that we can detect elements of synderesis, elements of conscience in both traditions. Okay? Right. And so here are the references. So this is the translation of Mencius that I'm using. Okay? So for those who want to study the Summa, you have the articles here. You can get it online. Yes. There's a very good article in the New Catholic Encyclopedia. This one. Very nice. Very informative. Very, and also intercultural. Right? I was pleasantly surprised to find that there were some intercultural elements in this article. Right? Yes. Then there's also this document from the International Theological Commission. It looks at natural law from various religious perspectives. Right? And then for those who are interested in moral philosophy, from Thomistic point of view, McInerney is always a good place to start. And those who are interested in comparative philosophy between Confucian and Catholic tradition, you can look at Li Yeli. Right. Thank you.